Welcome, everyone, to the SHARE conference, SHARE Peer Workforce Conference. My name is Cynthia Lieberman, and I work with SHARE. And this session is actually titled Pronouns for Peers. Meet Laurence Harmon. Laurence Harmon is a peer specialist at SHARE in our downtown LA offices. And Z has decades of lived experience in recovery from complex serial trauma, severe mental health, severe mental illness, and substance abuse. And today, if you have questions, this is being recorded. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I will help with that. We will be making this available at a later time. And if you need this certification so that the show that you attended, you can put it in the chat also, which I'm going to put all that in here. But without any greater further ado, I will let Z go. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. And welcome y'all. My name is Larry. I go by Laurence at SHARE because there's another Larry at SHARE, and we don't want to get confused. But at SHARE, I'm Laurence, but in the world at large, I'm Larry. I always have been. And you will notice at the bottom of my screen, it has my name, and in parentheses, there are some pronouns. Now, a couple of them you probably recognize. You probably recognize she and her. And I'm guessing you probably don't recognize. You're looking at that going, that? He, here, huh? Yeah, which is what everybody always does. Because those are not conventional pronouns, those are neo-pronouns. And basically, very, very few people have even heard of neo-pronouns. And that's why I have backup pronouns, she and her. And yeah, if you can't handle Z and here, if you've never heard of them, my main message to everybody is just relax. You know, there's no panic here. You know, she and her is okay. They're not great. They'll do in a pinch. You know, they're all right. And in dealing with people's pronouns, again, all I can do is speak from my own experience, because I'm not some kind of gender studies professor. I never even read a book on the subject. I'm just this chick who walks around in a dude's body, and you know, there's nothing really special about me. And you know, I don't really have some special body of knowledge or anything like that. And what I'm going to tell you is just drawn from my own experience and things that my friends tell me, friends I have who are trans tell me. And so I would like, now that we got my name and my pronouns out of the way, and I don't want you worrying about the Z and the here, because we'll get to that eventually. Let's just start.
You could just go to the start share.
You guys, okay.
There you
go. Okay, pronouns for peers. Why should we even be concerned about pronouns? And my answer to that is an ancient Chinese proverb. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right name. And so when you refer to a person by their correct pronouns, congratulations. You're on your path, you're on your own path to greater wisdom. You know, that's all you're doing, is that you're calling things by their right name. You're referring to a person by their right name. When I was assigned this project, the person I was talking to said, Larry, you gotta go over some real basic gender concepts because a lot of people don't know this stuff. And so that before we get into pronouns, let's discuss a few basic gender concepts. Like, for example, the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, because it seems as though a lot of people get these things confused. Sexual orientation, an enduring pattern of romantic or sexual attraction for persons of the opposite sex or gender, the same sex or gender, to both sexes or to more than one gender. These attractions are generally subsumed under heterosexual, heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is a real thumbnail sketch. But I just wanted to get across that sexual orientation is different from gender identity. Gender identity is a concept rather than a tangible physical feature that has been constructed by society. And I could go into depth in, the social assignment of meaning to human difference, but you don't really want to hear about all that. Let's just suffice it to say, gender identity is the personal sense of one's own gender, and it can correlate with a person's assigned gender at birth or can differ from it. Like, I'll give you an example. I was assigned male at birth. When I was born, the Cook County Recorder's Office issued my parents a birth certificate, and it said male on it. And that's how I was identified. And that's the gender I was assigned at birth, which isn't accurate at all. And now, I could explain to you a bit more about my gender identity, but like I said, it's kind of complex, and I want to cover some real basic information first. Gender expression. Before I go any further, if you have any questions, I want to get across some real basic information, but I'm also very, very interested in anything any of you might be wondering about or don't understand, or things that you need clarification on. I genuinely want to get across some basic concepts, but I also want you to be able to approach me with whatever concerns you have that maybe I don't even think about. As a trans person, there's a lot of stuff I just take for granted, and I don't think about. And I would imagine that there are some of you that may have concerns or questions or ideas that I don't even think of. And I would welcome any interjections into what I'm saying. Just speak up, and I would like as much as possible to have a conversation if we could. But continuing on, gender expression or gender presentation is a person's behavior, mannerisms, interests, and appearance associated with gender in a particular cultural context, specifically with the categories of femininity or masculinity. This also includes gender roles. These categories often rely on stereotypes about gender. Like, for example, I think most random strangers look at me and all that they see is just some kind of peculiarly dressed dude. And I don't think they really pay that much attention. They just kind of see an oddly dressed dude. And I am very atypical. I am not a typical trans person, because most of the trans people I personally know look, or at least try to look, different from their assigned gender at birth. And most of the trans people I know, in essence, are people who were born in the wrong body. It's just been a mismatch from the beginning. And and pretty much all the trans people I know, grew up insisting, no, wait a minute, I'm a boy, or, oh, no, wait a minute, I'm a girl, and we're forced to be the other one. And my experience is rather atypical in that, and at some point in their lives, they, as we say, transition. They change their gender expression to match what their gender actually is. And that involves a heck of a lot of work. And it often involves extremely complex surgery, hormone treatments, all sorts of stuff, because they are people who are born in the wrong body. Myself, I was born in the right body. I love the body I have. It's ideal for me. I don't want to change anything. And yet I'm a girl. And that particular combination works out just fine for me. But as I say, I am very atypical. And I was in a support group last Thursday for trans femme people. That would be people like me who were assigned male at birth, and like me are either girls or women. And I looked around the group I was in, and I was the only person there who didn't look like a cis woman. And we'll get into what the term cis and cisgender in a minute. Yeah, I was the only person who looked even remotely like a dude. So like I say, I am just coming from my own limited experience and the experience of my friends. And I'm no expert on this subject, but I'm just trying to get across a few real basic concepts. How are y'all doing with this? Do you have any concerns, questions? Is this puzzling to you? Does this make sense to you? Anybody?
I think this is great.
Okay, thank you.
Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Now, transgender. Transgender have a gender identity or gender expression that differs from their gender assigned at birth. Some transgender people who desire medical assistance to transition from one sex to another identify as transsexual. Transgender, often shortened to trans, is also an umbrella term. In addition to including people whose gender identity is different from their assigned gender, it may include people who are not exclusively masculine or feminine. Other definitions of transgender also include people who have no gender at all. There's a lot of stuff there. Allow me, if I may, to try to unpack this a bit. That first sentence, I think, is pretty straightforward. Sometimes gender people who desire medical assistance to transition. Most of the trans people I know end up going through a lot of medical procedures of various kinds to change their bodies in such a way that their bodies match who they really are as people. And fortunately for me, I don't particularly want to change anything. And like I say, I'm very atypical. I'm not typical in that at all. And that is, there's like a strict definition of transgender, and then there's a loose definition of transgender. That's the strict definition of transgender, is a person who was assigned one gender at birth and is actually really some other gender, and they want to go from that gender to this gender, or this gender to that gender, gender A to gender B, or gender B to gender A. that is most of the trans people I know, but that is not me. I'm happy with the setup I've always had all my life. And in that sense, for me, the word transgender or the word fragment trans is something of a misnomer, because nothing about me has changed, is changing, or for all I know, is about to change. I'm quite happy the way I am. I use different pronouns than I once used, and I dress better than I used to, but that's about it. Which gets us to the loose definition of transgender. And it's also an umbrella term, and I come under the umbrella. Increasingly in the last few years, 2-3 years even, trans is more and more of an umbrella term. It is more and more inclusive of people like me who don't fit the really strict definition of trans, going from gender A to gender B, because they were always gender B all along, and they were always just misidentified because of their body. Once you get into this kind of loose definition, excuse me, loose definition of transgender, this use of transgender as an umbrella term, you're getting into real kind of vague territory, and a lot of things pop up that, seemingly come out of nowhere. And this is the kind of thing that I don't think you as peer workers would be expected to be entirely conversant with, but you should be aware of it. That, the word trans or the word fragment trans or the word transgender, it can cover a heck of a lot of territory. I have one friend who, first of all, I didn't know for the longest time what gender was specified on this person's birth certificate. And this person, this friend of mine is neurodiverse. And sometimes this person goes by they, sometimes this person goes by he. More often than not, he goes by he, so I'll use he. He characterizes himself as agender, which is something I never even heard of before, because he's neurodiverse. And
Hey, Larry.
Yes,
Larry,
yes.
would you just explain what neurodiverse means?
I would explain it if I understood it.
Okay.
As far as I can tell, I'll just speak about my friend. My friend has been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum somewhere. And I think more often than not, that tends to be what it means. But again, once you start straying away from really strict, really firm terminology and concepts, things just kind of get real fast and loose, and terminology pops up that I would not expect you as a peer worker to be fully conversant with. But I think you should be aware that this terminology and these concepts exist. And when
you have transgender and transsexual, so do they use the same pronoun? Do they fall still under the same umbrella?
Pardon me? I
said, do they still fall? They still fall under the same umbrella. The difference between transgender and transsexual.
I think I don't even know why I included it here, because transsexual, again, I'm just speaking from my own experience. I'm no gender studies.
Right.
Or anything. To me, that is a rather outdated terminology, but some people use it. It's rather outdated. To me, it has rather negative connotations, but that's just me, I'm sorry, what precisely?
But if you're transgender, you said it's an umbrella term.
It
So
can be an umbrella term.
but in general, if somebody is considered transgender, what would be the preferred terminology in terms of a pronoun? Is trans okay? Is that acceptable? Is that the best thing for the acronym, or what? Is there something that should be different? Is there anything else that follows under that?
A lot follows under that. But yes, trans is pretty safe, and most people who are gender diverse in some way are generally included under that rubric of trans. People like me. I'm not going for gender A to gender B, but yeah, I'm trans and in the loose sense of the term, and increasingly there seem to be more and more people who are included in this kind of umbrella concept, because it seems as though in fairly recent years, like my friend identifying as odd gender, which is something I never heard of before, which apparently means a trans person who is neurodiverse. And there is an actual support group for trans people who are neurodiverse, or any gender diverse person who is neurodiverse. Anybody who swings a little wide of the norm, who is neurodiverse. And my friend attends that particular self-help support group for neurodiverse trans people.
So in your interpretation, then really it's the very first sentence. It's that you identify people have a gender identity or gender expression that differs from their gender assigned at birth.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But that and the strict definition of that is going from gender A to gender B or gender B to gender A. Yeah, and an awful lot of people, fall into that category. A lot of people I know fall into that category, but a considerable number of people I know don't fall under that category, like me, or like my friend who identifies himself as odd gender, and which is something I never even heard of before. And there's new terminology I keep bumping into that's terminology I never heard of before, because in a certain sense, the whole field of gender expression and gender terminology and gender identity at this point in time is increasingly the Wild West. And people just come up with pronouns you never heard before. Gender identities, like for example, odd gender. I never heard of odd gender before.
What is cisgender? Or maybe you could go through some of the pronouns.
Yeah, I'm getting. I should quit babbling and move on. Because
okay.
That's the next.
Well, see, I didn't even know about that.
I'm just, pardon me for babbling. Yes, and I wanted to get to this. Cisgender is a term for people whose gender identity matches their gender identity assigned at birth. And most people walking around, it seems to me as though they fall into this category. But then again, you can never tell by just looking at people. You really have to ask them. But this is actually a majority of people. Now, before we go any further, is there any confusion I can clear up for anybody? Does anybody have concerns, questions? Do you need something explained, or have you heard of something that you don't understand? How are people doing with this so far? Anybody?
I think you can keep going. It's interesting.
Okay. Because I would like people to just feel free to just interrupt me and just ask me anything, because
So a cisgender is typically the he or she.
Yeah, your random ordinary
standard pronouns.
You ran your male person who was assigned male at birth goes by he and him, and that's who they always were, and that kind of thing. That's what cisgender is. And again, what do you mean transgender? What? And this is where, well, let me just move to that. What do you mean transgender? What? Basically anyone who is gender diverse in any way can identify as transgender or trans. And I don't know how widespread the term gender diverse is, but that's the term I use and people I know use to describe basically anybody and everybody and anybody who, like, strays away from the double yellow line in the center of the road in terms of gender. If you're like different, in any pretty much any way, yeah, you're gender diverse. And if you're gender diverse, or if you're gender questioning, which is another, I don't want to call it a category, that's another term. There are people, and quite a few people actually, who are just kind of wondering, gee, what is my gender? I don't know. It's like, these male qualities, these female qualities, I don't know. I'm just kind of exploring who I am. And there's an awful lot of people doing that as well. And these are all people who are gender diverse, who, like I say, stray in any way, away from, in any significant way away from the double yellow line in the middle of the road. Is that clear to everybody? Have I lost anybody here?
I think so. I think we can keep going.
Okay. Now we come into the concept of binary and non-binary, and this is something that, as workers in the peer workforce, you should be aware of. Binary refers to the idea that there are two genders and only two genders, and you gotta be one of the two. If you're non-binary, which I am, I don't even recognize the legitimacy of the distinction between male and female. I don't recognize that as legitimate. I don't want to participate in that. And yeah, I'm non-binary. I'm a girl, but I'm non-binary. I'm a girl, but I'm not female. Now, if that seems confusing, it's only because it is. We're getting into some really kind of esoteric territory here, which I don't know if you really need to know as a worker in the peer workforce. Some of this stuff gets pretty arcane, and me being a girl but not female is getting kind of out in the tail of the curve. And there's lots of trans people who don't get that. Okay, so if you're a cis person who doesn't get that, you're in good company, because there are lots of trans people who don't understand that. And here again is where this whole field of gender identity, gender expression, gender terminology, especially in the last few years, is increasingly just the Wild West. And I think the next slide. Okay, now let me just, I think it's a couple. Okay, I wanted to get this. Okay, when I say the Wild West, there are all these concepts and terminology, and these are some of them that basically mean whatever people want them to mean. Queer, gender queer, gender nonconforming, gender questioning, which we just discussed, gender fluid. Gender fluid is actually more like people change, and some people change pretty rapidly and go from, this gender to that gender to another gender to somewhere in between and are kind of wandering around. There's a considerable number of people like that. And I have one friend whose pronouns, and I refer to that friend as that friend because I have no idea what that friend's pronouns are today or this hour, or let's see, the last time I saw that friend's pronouns were per person. And like I say, we're getting into really esoteric territory when we're getting into, neopronouns. That's not something, there are not an awful lot, not an awful lot of people who use pronouns like that. And
what in the world is gender disobedient?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a really good question because
I've not heard that before, so I'm curious.
There's a reason why you haven't heard that before. And the reason
maybe it's a good thing.
No, the reason why you've heard that before and the reason why I included it in the list is because I just made it up. No kidding, I did. I go,
it'll be in the New York Times tomorrow.
No, it won't be in the New York Times. It won't be anywhere. It's just me, right? I go, gee, gender nonconforming is pretty good, but I'm really more gender disobedient than gender nonconforming. I just made it up. And that's kind of my point. This is a field in which you can just make stuff up, and people do. People make up pronouns. People use pronouns I never heard before. I'm gonna use Fae, F-A-E. Actually quite a number of people use Fae. And again, as
what is it? What is Fae?
I have no idea. There's all kinds of stuff. I mean, people use pronouns. I have no idea what they mean. And if I want to know, I'll ask them.
What are some of the most acceptable or most commonly used and misunderstood besides trans is definitely obviously one of them. But what are some of the other ones? Like, what is Z, for example?
Which Z are you talking about?
H-I-R, here.
Oh, okay. You want to hear about my okay.
Yes, explain your pronouns.
Yeah, Z and here. Okay, here's the deal. See, I don't want to obfuscate with like, it's like, gender identity and gender expression nowadays is kind of like, it's getting to be kind of like medieval theology. It's so arcane. It's like, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Like, who cares? You're not going to run into an awful lot of people who use the pronouns Z and here, but I use them. I'll tell you why I use them. Because I'm a girl, but I'm not female. And when I say that, what I mean by that is, if you take girl and you remove the female, what you got left is Larry. That's me, okay? And no, I'm not male. No, I'm not female. So I use Z and here, which are pronouns that refer to no gender whatsoever. Okay, they are not gendered pronouns. They're not like she and her. They're not gendered. They have nothing to do with gender. And I like them because they kind of sound like she and her. That's why I chose them. I could have chosen other neopronouns, but I like Z and here because they kind of sort of sound like she and her.
Do you think that they are more commonly known? Like, would that be something that people, are you getting asked that all the time, or?
Yes, I guess that I do get asked that all the time. And people look at them and they go, he, who, I go, just she and her is okay. It's like, yeah, if you can't handle that, I don't want anybody getting a hernia from like verbal heavy lifting, So yeah, if it's like too heavy a lift, you just she and her is okay,
But H-I-R.
Yeah.
HIR sounds like here, HEAR, HERE in the English language is already complicated enough. So maybe explain where that came from, or what you know the origin, or why you prefer that as well.
Well, actually, the origin of it is German, and those are ungendered German pronouns originally. But again, I chose them. I could have chosen any number of ungendered neo-pronouns. I just like seeing her because they sound sort of like she and her. And
So as a peer, if you're in a peer, you're in a meeting, and there's someone there who is perhaps even new to their gender identification, would that be the right, whether their gender identity and what they think that they should be, and they ask you, or they want to know, or they're being hassled or something, what do you recommend? How have you been dealt with when this situation has come maybe in your court, so to speak?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Well, I'm asking, have you been mistreated or treated inappropriately, and how do you respond? What's a way to help someone who might be struggling with this? Do you have any advice coming from your firsthand experience that might help others understand how to manage it?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to be hearing two different questions in what you're asking. You're asking me, how do I handle misgendering? And you're also asking another question, it seems, how do you help someone who is struggling with what pronoun to use? Am I correct about that?
Yes, exactly. The inside and the outside of the experience.
Okay. Let's start with the harder one first. What do you do with someone who's struggling with what pronoun to use? Is you let them flounder around and learn to swim, and you just accept the fact that they're floundering because there's really nothing you can do to help them. This is part of their own gender identification process, and everybody has to figure this out for themselves. A lot of people are lucky. You know, it's like they're assigned one gender at birth, that gender, it fits, it works, it's all good, and they're born, live, and die in accordance with whatever the heck it says on their birth certificate. Lucky people. And there are a lot of people who struggle, and again, here I am very atypical of most trans people, because most trans people go through enormous struggle in coming to grips with their gender identity. It is extremely difficult. First off, because there's an immense amount of societal pressure, literally from birth, to act and think and believe and feel in accord with what it says on your birth certificate. And if you stray away from that norm as a kid, you get punished. And you know, a lot of people, you know, try to be the gender that they were assigned at birth, and it never really works out for them. And I know quite a few, maybe I'm trying to think, a lot of people, a lot of trans people who at first identified as gay cis people, simply because being a cis gay person is much more socially acceptable than being a trans person. And then they kind of migrated into transgender. I know a number of people who have done that. And what I would do is I would give that person the space and the time, the space to go through their own process in determining or discovering, whichever word you want to use, their own gender identity. I would view it as a kind of a hands-off thing. It's like, you know, be as supportive as possible. Try to create as safe a space for them to go through their own process as possible, because it's a very difficult process. Most trans people, it is extremely difficult. And then once they discover or determine, or whatever word you want to use, who they really are, then they have to change how they present themselves to themselves in the world physically, which is another struggle. And we all get a lot of, we all get hammered for that. And most trans people come to being trans through a very, very difficult journey. It is very difficult for most trans people. And again, I am very unusual in that respect, in that I did not go through heavy Sturm und Drang. I've always been a pretty peculiar person, and everybody who knows me just kind of knows I'm just kind of an odd person, and it wasn't that hard for me. I didn't really have to change much of anything except my pronouns. So I'm not sure. Did I answer your question? You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, I didn't want to step on you. No, that was great. Thank you very much for explaining that.
Okay. Now, and the reason I fast forward to the slide is I wanted to get to this term gender disobedient, which is just something I totally made up on my own. I've never heard anybody use that term. I just like it, and that's what you can that's what you can do nowadays. Yeah, I like that term. I'm going to use that. I like that gender. Yeah, that's me, because people used to think that gender was this either or thing, and then people I guess got more advanced, and they said, well, gee, gender is on this kind of like spectrum from male to female. And my response to that is, I ain't on no stinking spectrum. To me, gender is an infinite universe of possibilities, only an infinitesimally small fraction of which will ever be fully realized by people, because there are so many permutations and combinations of permutations and combinations with respect to gender that there are just an infinite number of possibilities. And that's kind of where I think we're headed with gender. And I think that's one of the many reasons there are so many people who are very, very, very uncomfortable with, various people's, gender identity and gender expression nowadays, because it seems to me as though there are an awful lot of people who are yearning for a great more certainty in the world than we have. And this just introduces greater uncertainty. And as a worker in the peer workforce, I think our job is to let that uncertainty be uncertain. And people who are exploring, let them go through their own process. Let them explore. Their pronouns change, let their pronouns change. Oh goodness, it's 2:44. We're not even halfway through this darn stuff. Let me just back up a couple of slides. I do want to cover a couple real basic concepts. And even these are just getting to be pretty esoteric. Trans femme and trans masc. And after trans femme, I put in parentheses AMAP. That's an acronym for assigned male at birth. That's me. I identify as trans femme and I'm AMAP. I have friends who are trans masc, who were assigned female at birth, AFAB. And trans masc people tend to go by the pronouns either they or he, and trans femme people like me tend to go by the pronouns. A lot of people use they. I don't care for they, or she, or in my case, Z, because I don't particularly even want to have a gender. Okay, another concept I want to get across before we bump up against the time limit is intersex. And a lot of people don't know what intersex is. People who are intersex used to be called hermaphrodites. And people who are intersex have genitals of both male and female people. And it's not as uncommon as people often think. It is uncommon. I mean, but it's a larger percentage of the population than most people think. And intersex people in particular have a really, really, really hard time of it, more so than trans people, because, first of all, they have to figure out, I don't even want to get into the nuts and bolts of this, but suffice it to say, again, if you're up here and you encounter an intersex person, what I would do, I would just create a safe space for that person to go through whatever the heck their process is, because an intersex person has a lot to figure out. And I don't know if they ever completely end up figuring it all out to any kind of certainty. So that's another thing another basic concept you should be aware of. And there's more of these people than most people think in the population. I forget what the percentage is. I think it's like 4 or 5% of the population. Okay, where are we now? Okay, now finally, we're at pronouns. Yay! That's what we're supposed to be talking about. Pronouns, what and why? What are personal pronouns and why do they matter? In English, whether we realize it or not, people frequently refer to us using pronouns when speaking about us. Often when speaking of a singular human in the third person, these pronouns have a gender implied, such as he to refer to a man or boy, or she to refer to a woman or girl. These associations are not always accurate or helpful. Often people make assumptions about the gender of another person based on the person's appearance or name. These assumptions aren't always correct. Now, in all honesty, I do this myself all the time, and it's not really something I should be doing, but I do make assumptions about people. And I confess, I try not to, but, when you've been doing it for most of your life, it's a really hard habit to break. The only thing I would add to this is he, she are the most common. I think the third most common is they, the pronouns they and them. And people use the pronouns they and them. First of all, they and them are regarded as singular, plural personal pronouns. They can be used as singular personal pronouns. Like Joe went to the store, they will be right back. Oh, you want to talk to Joe? That's them over there. It seems a little clumsy at first, and I guess it is. But if you use it, if you get used to using it after a while, you kind of get the hang of it. Those are, as a peer, those are likely to be the three most common sets of pronouns you're going to run into. He, him, she, her, and they, them. And like in my case, she, her, no, it doesn't accord with what's on my birth certificate, but it is a personal pronoun that people recognize, which is why I use she and her as my backup pronouns for people who can't really cope with, the neopronouns Z and here. At this point, are there any questions before we go any further? What do y'all think? Any ideas, any questions, any concerns? Okay, let's trot right along. Okay, when we refer to personal pronouns, we don't mean that these pronouns are necessary private information, generally are not. we mean that they are pronouns referring to a unique and individual. Hopefully, you now have a fundamental understanding of why pronouns matter. And for a peer, pronouns are especially important because pronouns have to do with identifying people as who they most authentically are. And as a peer, you always want to try to discover who people actually are, which is often a lot different than they may first seem to be. And they may have dimensions that you didn't know, or they always have dimensions. People always have dimensions that you didn't know about when you met them. And, you know, and also as a peer, I think I have a slide on this, you know, why pronouns matter, why should people identify their pronouns? Well, obviously, if you know your pronouns like differ from your assigned gender at birth, you want people to use the correct pronouns. But also, if your gender identity matches what it says on your birth certificate, you want to use your pronouns as well for a couple of reasons. Say you're a man, you've been he and him all your life, and you know it's never been an issue, and you've never even thought of your pronouns. You have what pronouns? What? Well, I'm he, him. Why would you ask? The reason why, there are a couple of reasons why. Because as peers, one of our jobs is to be the most authentic, the most authentic we can be in working with people. And when you tell people your pronouns, even if they match what they think you are, you're telling them who you most authentically are. Whether or not those pronouns match your birth certificate or not, you know, it's in your job description to be authentic. And when you, even if your pronouns match your assigned gender, you're being authentic. You're telling people who you are. Secondly, you're also normalizing the use and identification and expression of pronouns, which, believe me, for trans people like me is a really big deal. Because when I came to work at Share, the first thing I noticed was that everybody signed their emails with their pronouns, even when their pronouns matched what you would think they would match. And for me as a trans person, that was an incredibly welcoming environment. And it made me feel instantly comfortable. And I felt just, oh my gosh, I ended up working in a safe place. Wow. And it was a really big deal. When I started working in Share and I started getting, you know, emails and everybody's using the pronouns, it's a really big deal, you know, to me. To have that normalized, yeah, that's worth the price of admission. Oh yeah. So that's a couple of reasons why, as a peer, you would want to tell people your pronouns, even if your pronouns match what people think you are. You're doing a couple of things. You're being most authentic, and you're also modeling authenticity, and you're normalizing the use of pronouns for everybody. Okay, let's see where we're at here. Now, here's a good question. What if somebody else makes what you believe is a mistake? Say you know Jane over here to be he and him. You know Jane. Jane is he and him. And somebody refers to Jane as she or her. And this is something that used to be, until fairly recently, a pretty clear-cut thing. If someone else makes a mistake, maybe a little bit, this used to be the case as recently as, let's say, a year and a half ago. It was recommended that you kind of say to the person who misgendered Jane, like, hey, Jane is really he and him. You might want to bear that in mind in the future. Not make a big fuss about it. That's the way things used to be until fairly recently, like within the last year and a half or maybe a year. And what has happened in a very short period of time is that there is so much hatred and hostility towards transgender people afoot, especially in this country. And I've talked to people from other countries, and it's not as bad in other countries as it is in the United States. But here in the United States, it's unusually bad. There is just increasing, accelerating hatred of trans people to the point where we trans people, and I've spoken to my friends at this at considerable length, we feel very unsafe. We feel very scared. And it's gotten to the point where, if somebody makes a mistake and misgenders somebody, I personally would not correct that mistake. And the reason why I would personally not correct that mistake is because Jane over there might not feel safe, having his, pronouns expressed as he and him, because Jane being he and him in the present day, could have very severe bad consequences for Jane. And like I say, this has accelerated dramatically in a very short period of time, the last year and a half, and especially in the last 5 or 6 months. And this is something I've talked about, we trans people talk about a lot.
Which actually, you know what, Laurence, it's a really good reason why we needed to include this in our presentations today. It's as people become more introduced to this concept and become more familiar with it, then it'll be easier for everyone all around. And Cher is here to welcome everybody. And it's really wonderful to hear your story. It's almost 3, so I don't want to.
I'm only on slide 16. Oh no! There was one other slide I absolutely had to get to, and that was. Not that one. I don't want dog. Okay, this is it. This is another really important. Before we end, I want to get to this.
Okay.
This report again. 2 years ago, go up to somebody. Hi, name, pronouns. What's your name? What are your pronouns? I do not do that now, and that's a fairly recent development. And it's been, and especially, like I say, in the last 6 months or a year, no, I'm not asking people their pronouns, because asking people their pronouns can put them into serious jeopardy, actual physical unsafety. There are people who really, really, really hate us. And a lot of these people are heavily armed. I'm not kidding about this. We are very scared. And this is something I do not do nowadays. It used to be something I did. It is something I do not do now. And again, everything is in a state of flux, and trans people are feeling increasingly unsafe and increasingly scared, to the point where people I personally know are going back to their misgendered presentation of themselves in public, so that they don't get attacked, because people I know have been attacked. So I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. It's okay. I think we are pretty much wrapped up now. Our last guest, Christopher, just left. He wanted to say he enjoyed it, and thank you so much.